Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we have a guest who is one of the most enthusiastic people that I know for like game design and making games. His name is Bryn Jvan, and he's currently studying in Copenhagen on University ITU. And that's going to be all for my quick short introduction. And if you have any questions for Bryn, you can post them at the end of his talk. You can do this via Zoom chat or YouTube comments, and I will ask them to Bryn. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Bryn to give us this lovely presentation.
Hey, just to test, can you hear me and see me normally?
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay, great. So, hi, my name is Bryn. I'm probably going to give you this talk because of two reasons. Like, one, in the past half a year, I think I made on average like 1.2 games per week. So I make a lot of games. They're not great games, but I do make a lot of games, and I'm gonna try to share with you why I think this is helping me improve as a game developer and how it can help you improve as a game developer as well. So what this talk will do is I'll give you three things today. Oh, if it's gonna work, give me a second. Let me just restart this. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I'll tell you why you should be making more games. Secondly, I'll tell you how you should go about making more games. And lastly, I'll tell you what this will not fix and what are some of the other things you should try to watch out for when trying to approach game development from a quantitative point of view. So firstly, I want to start off with a little analogy, right? Making games is kind of like making pots. And in pot making, there is this analogy of a professor that had students. He decided to split them into half at the start of the semester. And he gave one half a task. Every week, they would have to make one pot. And the other half had to make one pot during the whole semester, right? So semester is 15 weeks. We have 15 pots down here and one pot up there for the other half that was making just one pot all the time. And the point of this analogy is to then try to ask yourself, like, who is a better pot maker at the end of the semester, right? Is it the people that made 15 different pots, or is it the people that made one pot but made sure or try to make sure that that pot is as best as it can be after all of those 15 weeks, right? So the answer here is like pot making is a process that takes you from start to finish, right? And as you make a pot from start to finish, you're going to become better at developing the whole process, at finishing and at starting a pot itself. Whereas in the situation where the people were making just one pot per week, they just got better at like one particular thing that they decided they want to improve on the pot, right? So maybe one week they were making the top better, maybe another week they were making ornaments better, right? But they never got through the whole process of creating a pot, except for like this one time through the whole semester when they made the pot. And this kind of applies to game development as well, right? Like starting game development and finishing game development are two completely different things than trying to polish out your mechanics in the middle of the development or exploring what kind of level designs you should be doing, right? This is something that happens in the middle, but at the start and at the end, you still have processes that are very important. At the start, probably being like idea exploration, trying to prototype things as fast as possible. Towards the end, being polishing everything up, making a UI that's actually not temporary, right? And the idea is here that as you make and make more games, as you go through this process of creating more and more pots, you're going to end up in a situation where you are more proficient at both the starting and the ending points, and not just in the middle point. Derek Yu, the game designer and developer behind most famously Spelunky, calls this game development death loops, which is essentially somebody like getting stuck in the middle, right? You, for example, polish a jump in a platformer, and after the jump, you go into the enemies, and after the enemies, you go onto, say, the world map screen. And after you're done with the world map screen, you take a look at everything and say, well, I've learned so much. I should go back and polish the jump again. And then you go back to the jump and you try to program the jump again, and then you program the enemies again, right? Like, and it's a that loop because you're going to be learning new things through game development, yes, but you shouldn't be going back. You should be finishing the game, because otherwise you will never get back to that starting point that is also very crucial for game development, and you will most importantly, never get to that finish point where you will learn how to finish a game. There's another thing to this, which I feel we can play into a little bit, is that games need to be played by people, right? And when we are creating games, we are essentially trying to create ideas and create prototypes for some sort of interactivity. And sometimes it turns out that people just don't like this, right? Like they just don't like something that we're making. And if this top bot is like some grandiose platformer, right, that we're trying to make, we are just trying to make that platformer instead of trying out different ideas that people might like a bit more. So if we break the pots, we can see that at the bottom here where we had multiple pots, we can find some gems in between them, whereas the top one just ended up being bones and not being useful to us, right? We can roll the dice again. Maybe we get something better up top. But no, again, like we got 3 gems down at the bottom and 0 gems at the top, right? Simply when you make more things, when you are ready to make different things in game development, you are much more likely to end up with something that people will like. And I'm not saying here that like game development is a coin flip and that you should like just hope that people like your game. Obviously, like you should try to put your best effort into it and try to like make the game as best as possible. But sometimes we are stuck in this top pot that it like is destined to just be skeletons because we're polishing the wrong thing, we are focusing on the wrong thing, where we should just move on and try to do something different. So the thing is, when we try out different things, we try out different approaches as well. If we consider our game a sword in this situation, right, and we're trying to fight a skeleton, okay, let's maybe try to hit him with this sword, right? Like that wasn't that effective. Let's try a different sword. That still wasn't effective. If we switch to the third sword, maybe this one is going to be a bit more effective, right? Like maybe we made this platformer sort of playable and some people enjoy it now, right? We managed to damage the skeleton a little bit. But instead, maybe what we should be doing instead of like swapping out these swords, we should swap to something completely different, like a hammer, right? Or maybe we should swap to a shovel or a pickaxe or a battle axe or a card, right? Or a musical note, right? Like the idea is that game development is a very, very vast medium, right? It goes everything from visual novels to MMORPGs, right? Like there's a big delta of games in between here, and there's a big delta of what sort of games people can make. And the idea is that as you try to develop multiple different games, you're going to end up becoming a better developer as a whole. You will learn the craft better and you will realize and more better understand how games as a whole work. Not just how platformer works, but also how rhythm games work, or how fishing games work, or how like spaceship flying rocket games work, or whatever, right? And the thing is, a lot of times, even if your goal is to just make the best platformer possible, even if like this is the only thing that you want to do, and you don't care about like that rocket jumping game or the fishing game, if you're just going to try to do platformers, and if you're just going to take inspiration from the platformers that already exist, you are going to only iterate on things uh, without essentially revolutionizing the genre, or without trying to disturb the genre. And a lot of times you don't even know if that iteration that you're doing is going to be good or is it going to be bad, right? So what I'm proposing here is that you try different approaches, that you try things that are outside of your comfort zone, so you get to know more of the medium. And then you can use those parts of the medium that maybe you didn't know before in creating your dream platformer or MMORPG or whatever it is you are trying to create. So please, like, remember that when you are making these things, right? If you remember the pots there, we ended up with a lot of bones, right? So please, please be ready to fail, because it's through failure that we learn things, right? And if you can only fail once with that one big game, then that is going to be your one chance to learn. But if you fail multiple times, then you're going to have multiple chances to learn, which is not something you had previously. And like more chances to learn is going to give you more chances to improve. But make sure that when you are failing, you're failing at different things, right? Because if I make a platformer and my platformer fails and I decide, okay, let's make another platformer, that's not really going anywhere, right? Like I'm not really diversifying the portfolio of games that I made, and I'm not really exploring game development as a like in different genres now. I'm doing the same things over and over again. So we need to make sure that like when we are failing at things, we should fail at the different things and not the same thing over and over again, because essentially like that's insanity, right? Like keep trying out new things and then go back to your initial ideas and try to like revolutionize them or at least iterate on them. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over. So the next question that kind of rises up here, right? Like, no, we know that, okay, like making more games hopefully can lead us to becoming better game developers. Hopefully I've convinced you with that. But how do you go about making more games, right? At the end of the day, nobody has a lot of time. I'm sure you have a lot of things you need to do, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Breen, I don't even have enough time to make one game, let alone make like 15 different games, right? But I'd argue you do have that time. Right? We just need to distribute it differently. If we take this as you, right? This is you. This is you making a game. You're just running along, making your game, trying to make it the best that you can, or this is you failing, right? This is you learning essentially. And the best way to get you to, well, fail more is to fail faster, right? Because when you fail faster, you're going to fail and then you're going to move on and you're going to have more chances to fail again and to learn more about game development. So in short, in very simple terms, we're just going to make games faster, right? Sure, that sounds very simple, but it's something that like a lot of times it's hard to hold yourself accountable to, right? There have been things such as Game Week, which has heavily been promoted by Rami Ismail. You might know him as one of the developers of any sort of Lambier game, so like Ridiculous Fishing or Nuclear Throne, for example. And he has advocated that people should try to make like one game per week and then move on from that game. However, I feel like that is like, well, it's really good. It requires a lot of willpower and a lot of accountability for yourself, like holding yourself accountable, which is something that people are generally bad at, especially in a time where everything is happening online and you're just like always a few meters away from your bed and you could just like maybe not do it this week, maybe do it next week, and then it quickly like falls out of habit, right? So instead of trying to do like to hold yourself accountable, I propose something else, right? Because like I said, right? Maybe making games sure is fun for you, and you're thinking maybe I'll spend a little bit more time on this game, or maybe you're thinking to yourself, making a platformer was fun. Let's make another platformer, right? Like I said before, like this is kind of going against what we established before. So instead of trying to hold yourself accountable for this sort of things, we can make it easier on ourselves and just ask our friend, the internet, to hold us accountable for this, right? Because the internet is going to ask you to make a game. Not only are they going to ask you to make a game, the internet is going to tell you, make me a game and give it to me in 1 week. Or it's going to tell you, give it to me in 72 hours, or 48 hours, or 24 hours, right? Sometimes we can get even a bit more extreme, and the internet is super demanding of you, and they want a game in 3 hours or 1 hour, right? And the idea here is, like I'm talking about game jams, obviously, is that the internet is going to hold you accountable for how much time you can spend on making a game. After that period is over, you give the internet your game, and the internet has your game, right? And that's the game they will give that you will give to them, and that's the game that they will try to criticize. But it's not only here in holding you accountable in terms of the amount of time spent on a game that it's really nice to use the internet. Additionally, the internet tells you what your game should be about, right? Not like directly, they don't tell you make Super Mario 4, right? They tell you make a game about fish, or make a game about grass, or about emotions, right? They give you a theme in game jams, and that sort of theme is something that you should try to follow in your game, and that encourages people to explore different ideas and not make the same game over and over again, right? So game jams, for those who don't know, are hosted on the internet usually. They give you a time limit, they're like a challenge of sorts, and they give you a topic that you need to follow, right? These two things, like I said, they force you to, first of all, make a game fast and hold by the time schedule. And second of all, they usually force you to iterate on whatever, like branch out of your comfort zones and do a game about something you usually wouldn't do on your own. So you make a game for the internet, right? And the internet takes your game and they tell you that your game is very shit, or that's actually thankfully not what usually happens. Thankfully, a lot of these game development communities that host game jams are very friendly towards people. They tell you that your game is good, but they importantly tell you why your game is good. They offer you feedback and criticism, which is also something that if we just keep making one game over and over, we're much less likely to get, right? When we have the external pressure of some like event of the internet here in this case, right? Telling us, hey, you need to give me this game in 1 week. Um, you give it to the internet, and then they criticize it. They give you the feedback, something that you don't have the pressure to get when you're just making one game and you're trying to iterate on that game, right? So it's easier to get feedback this way. It's easier to get your work seen. This is not like real organic growth. Like your game is not gonna like sell on Steam or something along those lines because people see it here. But it is people that are gonna play your game and that they're gonna give you feedback that you can learn from and become a better game developer when it comes to this sort of stuff. I just wanna like give you a few examples of games that started as like very small experiments inside of like this sort of environments and developers that were in this sort of environments that you might know of. Cactus, for example, that's a guy that developed Hotline Miami. Used to be, I think he made like 40 games in a span of 2 years before he started developing Hotline Miami, right? Like that's a lot of games to make in 2 years. JW from Vlambeer is very famous for making games, like multiple games per week. At McMillan, you can go to his Newgrounds page and you can play all of the small shitty games that he made before making Super Meat Boy. Terry Kavanagh, VVVVV, that started like as a prototype inside of like this sort of environment as well, right? And Adam Sonsman Cannibalt as well, which was the first endless runner, right? And I'm just giving like a few examples, and I'm not trying to like these examples don't prove that this works. However, you can see that like there are examples of people doing this and that it has been very successful for them, right? And that they have become like these are people that usually when you look up for game designers and developers, these are people that you're going to find. So use the internet. Use the internet to be held accountable to what your goal is, because it's very easy to use the internet in this case to be held accountable to your goal of making multiple games per week. I just want to like point out a few game jams that happen every week here. So if anybody is interested in trying out something like this, TryJam is one of my favorites. They do a game jam once per week from Friday to Sunday, but you can only develop for 3 hours during that time. And it's very like a very digestible amount of time, right? Like if you can scroll Twitter for 1 hour in the morning and watch Netflix for 2 hour in the 2 hours in the evening, then you cut that out and you participate in TryJam instead, and you made a prototype this weekend, right? 1 hour jam, as the name suggests, happens in 1 hour. I think it's every Saturday at 10 p.m. British time. I'm not 100% sure. Friday night jam, it's another 3 hour jam, right? Like these are all game jams that require a very, very minuscule, small amount of time of you just to like sit you down and force you to try to make a game from start to finish, right? And 3 hours might sound like a very daunting amount of time, especially if you're used to trying to make a game for the past 2 months. Like you've been developing the same platformer that I have assigned to this fictional you at the start of the talk, right? But you can surprisingly create very polished experiences, very like good prototypes, very much sketches of games, right? Like it helps you get ideas out on the paper or on the screen in this case and see what works and see what doesn't. If you're somebody who actually has the time to participate in longer jams. Mini Jam is a game jam that happens every second weekend, I think, and it is a 48-hour game jam. Whereas Weekly Game Jam is a 6-day jam, which happens well every week, right? So there are always game jams happening that you can join. So the excuse of there was no Lodom there this weekend isn't really applicable here, right? Like you can always find somebody that is going to hold you accountable towards the goal of making more games. Now, lastly, I want to talk about like what this does not help you with, because one of the things that I have learned is that there are certain things that I haven't gotten better at, right? And that I need to improve on outside of just making more and more games, right? Like I said at the start, this is like this talk that I'm giving you here. This is something that is going to help you become a better game developer, right? It is not something that is going to help you make complete games, or it is indirectly going to help you make complete games. And especially when it comes to complex games, this is not a format that like helps you very much with this. So if your goal is to try to make a game like Civilization, this is not directly going to help you make that, right? Because you can't really develop Civilization, a game that heavily relies on complex systems being reliant towards on each other to work in a span of 48 hours. you can develop like parts of those systems, and you can develop like you can find inspiration for these sort of things inside of this scheme, right? But this will not like directly help you make very complex games, because when you have a short amount of time, everything kind of leans towards simplification and towards the ideal of trying to create things that are going to be digestible in a small amount of time. This is also not going to help with teaching you good habits. I'm mentioning this because right now I'm participating in a bit of a larger project, and some of the people that are participating with me probably want to kill me because of my programming style, because I kind of gotten used to the fact that like I can throw away my code after 2 days, and that it doesn't matter what sort of code I write, because well, I'm never touching it after the weekend again, right? So this can sometimes be a double-edged sword, and it can teach you to like write code that is not going to be very readable by others, or that is going to make your programmers go a bit mad. It's also not going to help you with publishing a game, right? Like a thing that you make in 3 hours, 48 hours, right? Like it's more of a sketch than a game. And sketching is good and it does help you, right? Like that is the reason why we see artists sketching. But comparing a sketch to a finished painting or a finished drawing is something completely different. Sketching helps you learn the fundamentals. It helps you go through the start to finish through the process, but it's not going to be your completed work. It's not something you uh, put in hours and hours in, right? But what I want you to try to do is once you have like this collection of sketches, you look at your sketches and you decide, hey, I really like this sketch. I should make this into a real painting or a real game in our case, right? So that's kind of how indirectly it could help you publish a game, but don't expect to come out of a weekend where you spend making a game with a game that you're gonna put up on Steam and gonna sell for €5 or higher, right? Don't expect that. Expect sketching and expect like learning and building on the fundamentals of game development. Lastly, this is not gonna help you keep going, right? Like it's not gonna teach you discipline. When you're working on larger projects, sometimes you just need to like buckle down and sit down and work on like whatever boring thing you have to work on, which is not something that happens in short amount of time, right? Because when you approach game development with a 4 hour mindset, with a 3 hour mindset, you're gonna sit down and you're gonna go and rush through the whole process. And a lot of times, like just being hyped for the idea and the document and like the design that you're trying to achieve is going to carry you through every part of this. But when you're actually working on a project that is bigger and that is longer, there you will have to have the discipline to sit down and to simply make the game, right? So this is not something that you're going to gain by simply making a lot of small games. However, like I still think the benefits that you gain from making a lot of small games outweigh the negatives. And like I said, like a lot of times, if you just collect a pile of sketches, you're gonna find a sketch in there that is going to be good and that will be worth developing into a full painting. So hopefully this convinced you to make a few games, a few more games than you usually do. If you like the assets here, the little graphics, like the little dude running, it was made by Kenny. You can find all of his stuff at kenny.nl. I have a Twitter if you want to follow me and if you want to see some GIFs of some small game sketches, here it is. I also have an itch.io page, so if you want to play some of my sketches, here it is. And lastly, I have a website where sometimes I ramble about design. So go ahead and take that, visit that point at some point in your life, hopefully. Lastly, go make a game, right? Like TryGem starts in about 15 hours, I think, if my math is right. The theme is most likely going to be illegal actions because they are voting on the themes, and that's the one that's winning right now. And like I said, you probably have 3 hours this weekend. If you don't, I'm really sorry for your busy schedule and you probably shouldn't be watching this talk. But if you do, go ahead and make a game this weekend. Seriously, it's like gonna take you 3 hours, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. And you're gonna end up with a sketch at the end of this weekend that's hopefully going to let you explore some different ideas and iterations that you weren't really able to explore before. See you next time, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Brin, for this lovely talk. And now, as I said on the beginning of the talk, you can ask Brin some questions through chat or via Zoom or via YouTube. And I guess while we wait for the questions, maybe I will post like some of mine. You were saying that like these sketches or like these mini games, like they don't like kind of like publish it again. They don't bring it to the publishing game, right? But you also said that maybe you can take this and then develop it further. Has that happened to you in any other like way, or like was any of your game jam games later developed on and been published?
Yeah, I mean, I took some of the games and I tried to develop them a bit further. Magnetizer was like a platformer where you are a magnet that I made, and I made it originally in 3 hours. I have the prototype here, the 3 hour one, and then the finished product. I can show it, but it was just like I had a whole bunch of prototypes lying around. I went through some of these prototypes. I was like, hey, this is fun. I could try to iterate on this a little bit, and I ended up making it in a more complete, like half an hour game that later got released in a indie game development magazine, like as a part of a package deal there. It's free online, but it's like it was featured inside of the magazine. So there was I guess kind of like I don't really have that much experience publishing games, right? But like this is probably the closest that it ever got, and I don't think you need to take my word for it here, right? Like you can take the word of the developers that did similar things. Like I mentioned, like famously Super Crate Box, the like hit game from Vlambeer was developed originally as a 3 hour prototype. The same applies for Cactus, who made Hotline Miami, who made a whole bunch of like small, a few hour prototypes before it that he took and then like made into complete games. So yeah, um, like yes, ish for me, but you don't have to take my word for it, right? Like there are many other examples of this happening.
And think now, Tom, you had some questions.
Yeah. Hey. Thanks for the good presentation. So, what would you say? What is the most complex thing you can do in 3 hours, or let's say you can sketch in 3 hours, right? Or in a week, right? Because so that people can get in perspective. Yeah, I would love that I can create ideas in 3 hours or in a week of time, but how, let's say, how ambitious I should be.
I think it like really depends on what kind of things you want to focus on when you're making games, right? As a preface, when I try to make like these sketches, I try to make them into a complete package where it's like it feels like it could be a game, even if it's like a 2 minute slice of a complete game. So I don't focus that much on content a lot of times, but I think like in 3 hours I can make something that's like 4 or 5 minutes of enjoyable, of something that's enjoyable and playable. Whereas when it comes to like week, 2 weeks, it goes quite a bit further, right? Like recently, when it came to there was a game jam called Discroom Jam, which was a jam in celebration of Discroom being released, and I made essentially a mashup, like a bullet hell type game where you move to the beat. So it's kind of like Crypt of the Necrodancer, and that probably has like 20-ish minutes of gameplay. I can show some of my games if you want me to, that I like sketched. I would consider all of these sketches, right? But I have seen examples. There's this guy called Gray Charlie, I think, that participates in TriJam almost every week, and he makes games that are very much mechanics focused and doesn't focus that much on creating sounds for them as well, or creating like graphics that would be aesthetically pleasing. And he manages to make like very interesting games that last around 10 to 15 minutes in 3 hours, right? So it really depends at the end of the day what you focus on.
Thanks. I have another one, if I may continue.
Go ahead.
Right. So you're building a portfolio of your sketches, right, of your games, and maybe many of those you just scrap and don't look back ever. Although I probably don't think so. You might have an archive. It's always useful for a CV, right? But related to Rock's question, some games you would probably like to invest more time in them, right? So you have this decision now to make. Should I go for a new one, or should I now pick one from the portfolio that I feel deserves more attention? What is the criteria that makes you feel it deserves more attention? You make a decision. I will pick this one. Why?
I think like it's kind of like love in that sense. You kind of know like which game you want to make, where it's like, oh yeah, that was cool. Like it stands out from the rest in a sense. Like on my each page, I have a ton of these games that I made in 3 hours, right? And a ton of them I don't ever want to touch again. And they were fun to make in those 3 hours, and they were fun to play for like 5 minutes afterwards. But I look in them and I don't see like any sort of expandability or potential. I don't see anything unique in them. But there are a few that like I look at and I'm like, yeah, I could do something with that, right? Like I could see this being interesting. It's usually when I feel like I haven't realized the potential of the game that I want to take it and carry it forward, right? I have an example of a game that I made, Agent L, which was like it was just like you were dodging lasers in a room. It was made in 3 hours, and I felt like I've exhausted the game, right? Like I've made a few levels. It was maybe like 10 minutes of game time in the end, but it didn't feel like I could take this concept any further. If it feels like there's like some untapped potential, or it was like, oh, I wanna like explore on these mechanics, I wanna explore on this topic even further, right? Then I try to take it further. But usually, like what I wanna do as well is I wanna like let the game rest, because when you make something, it's like, oh, you're hyped about it. It's like great. It's kind of like with writing, right? Like if you write an essay, you'll feel good about it when you finish it, but then if you read it the next day, you're gonna look at your essay and you're gonna be like, what is this shit, right? Like nothing makes sense here. And I feel like a lot of times with these very short games, it's the same, where it's like if I check in later and I see the game 1 week later, sometimes I think to myself, what was I thinking here? And if that's not the case, then yeah, maybe I can take it further and explore on it. But just to like expand a little bit more, I also right now, for example, I don't have any game that like I wanna make. So doing this like this sketching is sort of an exploration of different things that you could be making, right? So it's finding something that I would wanna jump into next. And when I find something like that, it's like, okay, I kind of know like that this is something I want to expand upon. Let's go into this.
Thanks. Great. So until so far, it's based on your own love and feeling of what you created, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much intuition, but like it should be noted that I don't currently make games for a living, right? Like I'm studying game development and I hope to make games for a living at one point in my life, but right now I'm just like doing what I think is fun, honestly, and what I think like creates interesting games. So it's not really like I'm talking to publisher and trying to like, here are 50 games that I make. Pick one that would fit well on an iPhone.
Yeah. So I would be really interested, let's say in a year or two, and maybe in 6 months, when you will want to start live out of making games, right? How will you then look at this afterwards, when you will have to pitch to publishers? So you will have to publish the game, right, and fund it throughout the whole development.
Yep.
So we can have this chat again in a year or two.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was interesting. Like last weekend was the Polish game industry conference, and I got to talk to some publishers that were attending that, and I mentioned to them like what I'm doing, and like I told them basically I'm not here to pitch any game, but I make a whole bunch of small games, and I'm just trying to see what the indie publishing scene is like. You know, like okay, that's great. Like if you find something that you actually enjoy out of these small prototypes that you have, try to develop it a bit further and send it to us, right? So I am like fingers crossed. I'm hoping that like I can keep the same approach of just like making a whole bunch of sketches. Then if I find one, take that one, try to pitch it forward, right? But I guess I'll have to see. I think that like this approach, while it doesn't like, I'm not sure how it like fares in commercial games, because like I'm basing this on my own example and on like some famous game developers examples, right? But I think like when it comes to learning the fundamentals of game development, it gives you a lot, because you go through like this pot making process a lot of times, something that like you don't really do with just making one game over and over.
Thanks.
Brin, one question from Istok Lovincic. Hey, how do you go about getting as much feedback and exposure from online game jams?
So I don't think you should like aim to go into a game jam to gain exposure, right? It's like a bonus on the end, like it's the cherry on top that the waiter decided to put on your cake. But like first of all, you should always try to make a game that runs in the browser, right? Because like you gotta take the context of like what you're doing here. You're putting a game on the internet that some person you're expecting them to play for maybe like 5-10 minutes, right? So you want to make it as easy as possible for that person to play that game, right? So make sure it's an HTML build. Make sure like everybody can run it. Make the thumbnail appealing. You can like actually put GIFs in thumbnails on each. So like if you have like some very cool moment of the game, like have that moment play in a GIF and then fade to like the title of the game or something along those lines, right? Like it's kind of trying to catch the attention of people. But a lot of times, what also happens, and like what is, I think, more preferable way is to just join the Discord of the jam and try to get engaged in the community, right? Because a lot of times, especially like with the smaller jams, Try Jam and 1 Hour Jam especially, they have people playing those games once per week on stream, so you can get like some live discussion with the person that's playing the games on the stream, and you can get discussion with the Twitch chat going, right? If you're inside of Discord, a lot of these Discord just have a feedback channel where you can ask for feedback, but it's always like a two-way street, right? Like you shouldn't expect for people to just give you feedback. Like you post a game and then you're like, I'm out of here. I'll see you guys in 1 week, and then you're not gonna like check your inbox and see like a ton of feedback, right? It's more like you give, you take sort of deal. Like if you help other people out, they'll end up helping you out, right? I mean, when you comment on a jam page on itch, your game shows up next to your comment, right? So it kind of like incentivizes that helpful nature of like, I'm gonna write a comment for you. Maybe you will check out my game, or like it's more likely that I'll check out another person's game.
One question from my side, which already also Tom already like started. Like, it has like multiple levels. So one question is like, what do you think that it's like maybe current state of like indie game development currently? And how, like, second question is, how do you see like itch.io, like what it can, what gives to you, like how can be like this kind of like a marketing platform, or like platform for game jams. And the third question is, how, like, what is like the industry like in Denmark, or maybe more specific in Copenhagen?
Okay, so I'll first go over like, firstly, I think the indie industry is healthy. I don't think that I'm somebody who should be speaking on this though, because I don't feel like I know enough about it, right? Like I'm lucky enough to not need to care at the moment whether or not somebody wants to publish my game. So I'm not struggling by like trying to pitch my game to a ton of different publishers and everybody rejecting me. I think that there are like some interesting developments going on in the scene though. For example, last month, 10 micro games, no, 10-minute games was published by a whole bunch of like a collective of developers, which was basically a collective of small video games. Nerd Monkeys, a Portuguese publisher, is trying to do the same, but they're trying to focus on a thematic. Like they're gonna make a collection of small games that range from like 10 minutes to 30 minutes, but horror. And then next time around, they're gonna do puzzles, I think, right? So it's like we have these developments of smaller games becoming more commercially viable. Playdate, like a small console developed by Panic, who published Untitled Goose Game, is also like opening an avenue for this sort of stuff, for like small experimental games. So I think like in that regard, like this is something that interests me, and I'm super excited about this stuff, to see like games that are more like, that are closer to sketches than anything else being published and being like a viable commercial platform. Uh, so that's it for like me and indie development, right? Because like I don't feel like I know much about indie publishing. In terms of itch, I think itch is a great platform for participating in game jams and for like engaging with game jam communities, or rather like for leading you to the Discord of the game jam community where then you can engage. I honestly don't think itch.io is a useful platform for anything else besides game jams, right? If I publish a game and it's not a part of a game jam and I put it on itch, it's not going to get any place. It's like useless essentially, right? Like you don't, the discoverability on itch is very low, and that's because people that are on itch are mostly developers and not players themselves, right? Like people that play games, that play browser games, don't go to itch because there's, honestly speaking, too much trash on it, right? Because anybody can publish a game, and it's a lot of times like you would have to search through like a lot of bad games to find a game that you would find interesting. So players, like people who are willing to play games in their browser, are much more likely to go to website like Congregate and Newgrounds, which I would like recommend if you have like a game that you think is like a bit bigger, right? So maybe like something you did in 1 week and you're really proud of, put it on Newgrounds because you actually get people playing the game there. And like by people, I mean players, not just other developers giving you feedback on the comments. But you do need like a better game to get reception there and for people to even like approve of it. For example, like Newgrounds has this like scouting sort of deal where it's like I think like 100 people have to play your game, and the game has to get like a rating that's better than 3 out of 5 stars for it to be like featured on the new games page. And then once it's featured on the new games page, you can very easily like get up to 5,000 plays without a problem. And those people are very like quick to comment on games as well. You can make like they have like their own system of achievements that you can implement, which gets some people to play even more. So there's like this weird ecosystem of people that play online games. It's not really like it was during Flash, right? Like it's you won't get millions and millions of people playing, but I published some of my games on Newgrounds, and I got like people that are just players and not developers commenting on them and sending me questions about them, and that felt like really interesting because you'd see feedback from a different point of view, right? You don't get the feedback from another developer sitting down and playing your game and telling you, hey, I think when you went to level design you were focusing too much on blah 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 mechanic. You get the player feedback, right? Which is, why are there only 10 levels? This is shit, right? Or this is awesome, game was too hard, or game was too easy, right? Like you get a very different kind of feedback, but you get feedback that still allows you to like sort of create like this mental image of what went well in terms of game development and what went badly. So I would really recommend just publishing a game if you make like a game that's bigger on Newgrounds, because on each like outside of game jams it's kind of useless, honestly. um Second, last thing that you asked was about Copenhagen and the game development scenes
Yeah.
here. I would like to tell you more, but like the meetups are not really happening here that much, so I'm not really like participating in meetups right now because like they tried to do like some offline meetups, but they were we had to register for tickets for them, and I was trying to register for a ticket 3 hours after the link went up, and that it was like sold out. You couldn't get a ticket anymore because like obviously there are restrictions on how many people can meet up. But in terms of just like the university and studying game development, I think it's pretty great. It's there's a community of people that are trying to do the same thing, right? Develop games, and everybody approaches that from a different perspective, right? Like I might try to make a lot of small games. Somebody else might want to create like a massively multiplayer MMORPG. Somebody might focus like very much on the tech side. Somebody is super into coding shaders and trying to make things look pretty, right? There's a lot of people with different backgrounds, and I love that because it creates for a very dynamic environment. But otherwise, just like Denmark has a lot of game studios that are quite successful, and there's Sweden like one bridge next to us, so like we can always swing by IO and go and check out the Hitman games.
Nice. Thank you for the answers. Um, I guess I will ask one more if there like nobody else. I'm checking the both chats. Um, yeah, one thing that I wanted to ask you, like, this that I knew like from before, like your background is more in. You first started in UX, right? And then you transitioned to game dev, and from then on, like, did you like do you like feel that that was like had any impact on how you design your games and how like your design is seen like on the outside?
So yeah, for sure. I mean, like I think it makes sense that like your background impacts what sort of stuff you're making, especially with games that are like graphic design, illustration, sound design, level design, which like doesn't exist anywhere else, kind of architecture, I guess, programming, right? Like music. There's so many things that fuse into this. So like I feel like I put a bit more effort into like the aesthetic and the eye pleasing part of games because of my background in graphic design, and because this is something that I did before. But especially like focusing on UI in user interface design, there's this like mantra of fail fast. Just like make a lot of prototypes, test them out as soon as possible. That I try to carry over to game development as well. it was hard at first, especially because it's like with games, you're trying to make something that's interactable and like this is my baby, right? Like this is something that's supposed to be fun. It's not like a banking app or something boring where I don't care if people tell me like I would care less at least if people tell me that they don't know how to use a banking app. I would be like, okay, I need to redesign it, right? But when it's something that I'm assuming is going to be fun or trying to make fun, it's a lot harder to put it out there and like get like break your like kill your baby and like be ready to take in the hard feelings in a sense. uh but yeah, I guess like that's the thing that I try to bring with me, and like just failing fast and creating a lot of different prototypes, and that's what is seen right now, I guess, with me just making a whole bunch of like small games every week.
Thank you for the answer. Uh, and one more question. Before you mentioned the conferences, um, do you have any like recommendations now that basically now with the corona, like all of the conferences are moved online, and it kind of like I think it kind of like democratized or like it opened the new like it opened like doors to like indies from all over the world to join like GDC, GITS, what Russian is like white nights, like also in you can join like Unite online, like whatever, like all of these conferences are live now online. And yeah, like one question, like do you have any recommendations? And like do you have any maybe like guidelines, or what is your experience with these online conferences?
I actually haven't participated in like that many online conferences as I would like, because I feel like I'm super busy here. So I only participated in GITS, and I participated in Design Matters, which was an offline conference. But I think like just go and join those conferences if you have the time, right? Like there's so much stuff going on. There's a website, I don't know the name. I can like find the link, but it's a website that aggregates all games conferences together, and you can literally see like events happening all the time. Like meetups like this are opening up to foreigners, right? Like 1 year ago, it would mostly just be people in Slovenia that would come to this meetup. Now, theoretically, like there's some people watching on YouTube. Maybe they're not even from Slovenia. I saw that like the Dutch games industry has like some meetups that are also like theoretically open to everybody now, even though like it's supposed to be only for Dutch people when it was offline, right? So you can just like go and walk into people. And my experience is that people are a lot like very friendly in game development. Just like go walk up to them. Like worst case scenario, if you fuck up and if like there is something that like you make yourself embarrassed, they probably won't remember it. So just go and talk to people. It's kind of awkward now that everything is online, because before you could like go and have a beer with somebody and everything would be a bit easier because of the alcohol and and so on, right? But nowadays it's like there's this meet to match, like most conferences have that, where you can sign up for meetings with people. And at least for me, just I just like wrote messages to publishers like, hey, I make a bunch of small games. I don't have anything to pitch for you. Would you still be willing to talk with me about games and publishing a little bit? And most of them responded with yes, we're willing to do that. So it's just like try it out. You literally don't lose anything besides some time. So if you have time, go ahead, give it a shot. Why not?
Nice. I think that's a great like spirit and like great motto. Um, one more question that I wanted to ask you. Um, so you talked before about like Rami and other like game designers. I forgot of the name. Like, do you have like any like game design idols, or like somebody that's kind of like you is like your inspiration, or like who do you look up to?
I mean, yes, but I feel like game development is not something that is done alone. It's something that's usually like in 99% of the cases for games that succeed, they're done in some sort of teams. So I don't really think we should be idolizing people or trying to look up to somebody. There are people that give amazing talks and that like I take for inspiration, right? But I think like you don't want to idolize people because like look at where they took us, where that took us with like people like Phil Fish, for example, or Edmund McMillan, like the creator of Super Meat Boy, who was a indie rock star, right? And still is an indie rock star. But we were in the like people idolize him because of Indie Game the movie. which I don't think like paints a good picture of game development as a whole. So like games are made by teams, so we should look at teams and how they work together, and not look at like people and what they say. Because for like every Rami Ismail that gives a ton of great talks at GDC and other conferences, there are developers that just don't feel like speaking out that much, that are great and amazing developers as well, right? That make games that you look at and you play with joy and you enjoy a lot, but they just don't end up giving talks and they just aren't that public. I recently like there's this developer named Prox. He's like some guy from Austria, I think, who makes games that I really enjoy playing off. There's no like talks of him. It's just like small web games that he makes, and it's like I could say that I look up to him, right? But at the end of the day, the guy never like gave any of his like philosophy on games and why he believes into in something, right? And he's still somebody that like I think makes amazing games. So it's like, yeah, I would say that I look up to some people, but for every person that I look up to, there are probably like a bunch of people that influence me as well that I don't look up to because they are just not as public as others are.
I might have a follow-up question on this. Sorry to jump in, Rock.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said in the game the movie doesn't portray a good picture, right? The movie is already now. I just opened it now again. It's 8 years old already, right? So okay, maybe 8 years ago you were not yet making games, I guess, right? But comparing to the movie, what do you think it portrays in the wrong way, or what do you feel changed from then, right, till today?
So okay, maybe it doesn't like I said it portrays it incorrectly because like it portrays like this, it follows three like superstar developers in a sense, right? Where their games we knew that they were going to succeed, right? Like Jonathan Blow made a whole bunch of games that were super successful. Phil Fish made Fez, which was like super anticipated, won a whole bunch of awards before the game was even released. And Edmund McMillan's Super Meat Boy, Meat Boy, was very well received on Newgrounds and was like getting more and more traction. And then it shows these people overworking themselves and suffering for 2 to 3 years to try to get that game out on consoles. First of all, like indie game development doesn't care about consoles that much anymore, right? Like it's not that big of a deal if you are on a console or if you are on Steam. Like there are hundreds of games getting released on Steam every day. So big deal if your game gets on Steam, big deal if your game gets on a console, right? So it's not like some instant success like it makes it seem in the movie. And most importantly, it's just this fact that like they are like portraying this as people overworking themselves for such a long time, right? And then linking this overworking to success is not something that's necessary. Sure, maybe it like was the case for them, but you could look at like games from a similar time period, like VVVVV, that came out and they were not developed with crunch, right? Or modern like independent developer games that were not developed with crunch as well. And with mobile industry becoming more and more popular, like that's a part of the industry that's also developed with like way less crunch from like where there is way less crunch from my understanding than we have in traditional game development, right? I think that like this is still the case, right? Like I mean, um, I recently saw a tweet like Naughty Dog, right? The developers of Uncharted, I think, right? They were called out like throughout the whole year for having horrible like development standards and for getting developers to crunch a lot. And they won Studio of the Year this year, which is kind of ironic, right? Like, what makes them Studio of the Year? Is it their like relation to the developers that have to work 60 hours per week? Like, what makes them this? And I just don't think we should be encouraging this sort of stuff because it sounds like I don't want to work in an industry that's gonna make me work 60 hours per week, right? So it's like maybe wishful thinking from my side, but I don't think we should refer to this sort of stuff, not only because things changed, but also because we don't want to encourage this sort of behavior and this sort of industry, I suppose.
Yeah, great question, and also a great answer, Ebrin. Is there any more questions? I guess not. Okay, maybe one last that I remembered now. Like,
There's
I
one in
think
the Zoom chat.
Okay, so from From Milan, he's asking, are you planning on staying in Denmark when you finish your studies, or do you have a job already lined up somewhere else?
I honestly have no clue. Like, I didn't plan that far ahead. I would like hopefully I get a scholarship from Slovenia, which means I need to return back to Slovenia. But I'm just gonna like go with the flow more or less. Like, I would like to make games more independently, and there's a whole bunch of studios that are already great and doing that I would be very happy to join. Or maybe I would start my own studio, or maybe I would work like in some AAA thing to get a bit more experience, and then at one point branch off from there. But who knows, right? Like, game development is a industry that is evolving with every day. So even if I make a plan today, who knows, like, if that plan is going to hold true in 1.5 years time. So I don't have anything planned.
Okay. There was also one comment from Oscar Feconia. Like he's saying, like, great point with the portrayal of the devs overworking and being normalized by the indie game, the movie. And one more question that I wanted to ask you, like, do you see like future in this like small games, like, because we see it on the mobile market, like this rise of hyper casual games. And recently I found out like this mini studio like Sock Pop, which basically they have their model is like subscription based. You pay them on Patreon and they release, I think, one or two games or two games per month, right? But they're like smaller games, and I think the subscription is like around 3 euros. So my question is, yeah, do you see that like future of this kind of like small games, like, or like small to medium games, which give you like kind of like, I don't know, 10 to 20 minutes of gameplay, not like AAA, which gives you like 50 to 60 hours of content?
I think like there is a market that's kind of building up for this. I'm not sure if publishers really are going to accept that, at least very soon. Because it's, first of all, like, if you have a small game, selling it on Steam is a really stupid idea. Because if your game is shorter than 2 hours, people are just gonna refund it after they finish playing it, right? So that's like one of the reasons why publishers don't really want to do this. But I think like there is a market for this sort of stuff, and especially if you look at sock pop games, they're much more like these very cozy, very cutesy games. And like, this is without any market research being done. But I think you could argue that this sort of games are played by people who don't play traditional capital G gamer games, right? So probably it's not the person that plays Dark Souls that's gonna play Sock Worlds from Sock Pop, right? It's probably a different type of gamer that before just didn't have a game to go to, right? So I think it's expanding the market in a sense, and I think there is a future for this sort of games. It's just like, how long will it take for the market to grow to a point where it can be sustainable to make this sort of games? Because Sock Pop is a very rare example of this being successful. They have a very like unique style and a very recognizable style. Like, you see a screenshot or a GIF of a game and you can tell that it's a Sock Pop game. And I like, they're doing a really good job with it, I think. But it's hard. Like, it also depends like how big the market is for this right now. Like, are they consuming like everybody? Like, are they overtaking everybody that would be potentially interested in this sort of stuff? I think Switch is also a console that might be interesting for this sort of releases, right? Because Switch has a much different audience than PS5 and Xbox, and you are much more likely to find like these sort of cute games, small games succeeding there. Um, so yeah, I think there is a future. I'm not sure like when that future is gonna happen, because I wouldn't say that it's here right now, right? Like, I'd say that you as an indie are still probably much more like, it's still much more safer to make like some typical indie game than to try to go for something super small. And like, by typical indie game, I would probably mean like Metroidvania platformer that's super hard or something along those lines, right? But I don't know. I think there's a future. I hope there's a future for this sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you, Bryn. And I think we will slowly finish up. I will also post a Zoom link on YouTube so that you can join to our like unofficial discussion on Zoom. And yeah, we're gonna slowly wrap up this. Thank you again, Bryn, for the amazing talk and for the answering all of the questions.
No problem.
And yeah, that's it. I will just wait a few minutes for any last questions. And in meanwhile, one more one intermezzo question, what do you like? How would you say what's your blog about? What do you like? What tell me more about this rambling and what do you like?
It's just like a personal like landmark diary sort of thing, I guess. Like whatever I feel like I accomplished something, not necessarily accomplished, but like whatever I decide something a bit more concrete about design, I try to write it down so it like serves kind of as a land post for me. So it's like I can look back and say, okay, during like October of this year, I was thinking a lot about like what design actually is. Or before that, I made like Magnetizer and I posted about postmortem of Magnetizer sort of thing. So I can just like look back and see like, oh, these were my thoughts. Like that's why I decided to make the game the way it was. So it's kind of like a snapshot of my memory, a time capsule of sorts. So I can like look back and see if I still agree with this or not. So it's just like me me writing down what I think about design, which isn't necessarily always connected to games, but or like directly connected to games. But yeah, it's just ramblings. I just want it to be like online and not a diary because I know that like if it was just on a piece of paper, I would never look at it again. But no, I'm much more likely to go there and actually look at what I'm writing about.
Cool. And I think with this thought, we're gonna finish this stream. Thank you all for joining us, and yes,
Just
we
to
are
mention really fast,
okay. Go ahead.
this the slideshow will be on my itch page as a game, so you can like play through it. And I'm gonna put a few links underneath there as well. So like if this interests you, like small games especially, you can like go to some other talks that are super cool in terms of developing small games and just making more games and trying to learn from that.
Okay. Thank you,